Good afternoon. Hi. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Special extra hello to those of you who were with us last evening as well. There's a few of you here. We are getting punch cards. Don't worry. You will get like a free coffee if you continue to show up. I'm so grateful that you're all here. I'm Sherry Pascarella, the executive director of the church. I think I know every single person here, maybe not one, so please introduce yourself afterwards. On behalf of the church, I'm happy to welcome you back. Today's program is a continuation of the programming surrounding our current exhibition called Here and Now, the Churchennial, which is a highlight of the first 3 years of our residency program, which spans from 2021 to 2024. If you have any questions about our residency program, there's lots of informational text available in the corner over there, just underneath the stairs by the pianos. Be sure to check it out. Thank you all so much for being here. We're bringing back two amazing residents. They were both here at very different times and had, in fact, not met before we brought them together for today's dialogue. But it was it was easily noticed between our wonderful programming manager, Kristen Santori, who I'd like to acknowledge has been a fabulous component of today's talk, and she is not here today, and myself noticing the thread between some of the common themes in the life and the works of Bill Goldstein and Thymaya Payne, who we are going to be exploring in dialogue today. So, a tiny bit about each of them. Bill Goldstein is a writer. He has been an editor. He has also been a lecturer. He is well known for his most recent book, which was called The World Broke in Two. And his forthcoming book is one that he was working on while in residence here in 2022, continues to research, which is the biography of Larry Kramer. Thymaya was in residence here in 2024, is a writer, a filmmaker, and a professional of various sorts. Thymaya is well known for a film, a documentary film actually on Somali pirates that we viewed while he was in residence here. How many people had the opportunity to see that? Oh, quite a number of you actually. It was quite staggering and very interesting and very different from the project that Thymaya is working on now. Thymaia's creative output is largely in the written word, although his background is in filmmaking. He has experience working in both fiction and nonfiction formats. So today we will be exploring, generally speaking, the fiction of non-format. And that's a very broad way of framing our dialogue, which will also be an intimate examination of the content that they're both grappling with, as well as their experiences as individuals and writers in the world. So please help me welcome Bill Goldstein and Thymaya Payne. So to begin, hi guys.
Hello.
We had an advanced prep, so I might be referencing that a little bit, and hopefully we will be able to open up a dialogue that is warm and inviting for all of you, and we do encourage your questions at the end of the conversation. So to get started here, let's begin at the place of describing the current project that you're both working on, as well as how that project relates to you personally, what your way into that material is. In both of your cases, your current work has some reflection of who you are as well, and you connect to it deeply personally. So I guess we'll start with Bill.
Thank you. Thank you also to the church for having me in 2022. I know that seems, why have you not finished your book by now? But I have about another year, but the time I had here was essential to that and to being able to write the book, and I love being back here, so I'm grateful for the invitation and also grateful to have been among the earliest residents. So my book is about Larry Kramer, and the way I came to it is, so for a long time before writing the book that I did, The World Broken Two, I worked as a journalist. I worked first at Publishers Weekly. That was my first job after college, and so I've always been involved in books and writing or writing about books. And I knew Larry. I mean, what was a surprise to discover once I started doing research is that I remembered that when The Normal Heart, which is probably his most famous work, it premiered at the Public Theater. It's a play about AIDS, if you don't know it, and a fictional version, but of the founding of Gay Men's Health Crisis, which Larry was one of the co-founders of. And when the play was running at the Public, and I worked at Publishers Weekly, the publicist for the book version invited me to see the play and to have dinner with Larry afterward. And I always remembered that had happened. We had dinner at Gotham on East 12th Street. But when I started doing research in Larry's papers, I found that among everything else he had saved all his date books, both professional and personal, back to 1960 when he was 25. He was born in 1935. And as I was looking through them, I found that we had dinner on Thursday, September 5th, 1985, because it was in Larry's date book. So there was at the bottom of the little page of the calendar, it said NAL, that was his publisher, New American Library, at theater, and then up the side of the page was my name, and I was shocked to see that I have known Larry, or had known Larry, since September 5th, 1985. So we knew each other professionally, and then he read my book, The World Broken Two, and we got together to talk about it. And in the course of conversation, I wasn't thinking of that I would write his biography, but he had this tendency, if any of you met him, he could be quite ebullient, quite effervescent, funny, and then all of a sudden he would just sort of descend into moroseness and on a dime. And so as we were sitting there quietly that day, I thought, oh, well, I'll remind him that people still care what he's about and what he did, and I'll ask him who is writing his biography, but as a subject of conversation. And I said, oh, well, isn't someone writing a biography of you? And he said, no. And so then I thought, oh, well, that conversational gambit didn't go anywhere. But then it occurred to me, not right then, when I left his apartment, that maybe I could do it. So I feel that as much as I am writing about Larry objectively, even though I knew him, I mean, we weren't close, that calendar listing, or that calendar image shows that my entire life has really been shaped by that period and by the AIDS epidemic. So I feel that without it being a personal book, the way Thymaya's book is, I don't know if the right word is implicated, but I'm sort of interwoven with it because much of the book is about my own lifetime's experience, even if it's not my experience. Did I not speak long enough?
I just understand. I remember, Bill, you were saying 1981 was sort of the start of your story, and then tracing the lifetime of Larry Kramer over that period. AIDS was identified and named in 1981, so we're basically your adult life, right, and that of the AIDS crisis, and the sort of creative output of Larry Kramer, that you were committing yourself to looking at the history of AIDS in your lifetime, basically.
Yes, I mean, and what I mean, in writing the book proposal, obviously, and talking to anybody about Larry, I mean, I knew that I was writing about the AIDS epidemic, but what happened was when I first started to work on it and began to think about it, I was very worried, if any of you knew Larry or knew even the slightest bit about him, how difficult he might be. And I was very worried about the kind of difficulties he would raise, that it might end up being an antagonistic relationship. And it didn't occur to me really until about 9 months into the research at the Beinecke Library at Yale, which is where his papers are. I came chronologically to the spring of 1981. And I was sitting in the library and I realized, oh my God, I have to relive the AIDS epidemic in this book. I didn't really realize that it was going to be a book about AIDS, because I'd been so focused on what Larry's personality might be. And by the way, I mean, he never was difficult with me at all, but that was a shock to me. And it was so visceral. I mean, I almost cried in the library as I was reading the first intimations in his letters. This was before it was even named or known that it was a disease. Two friends had become sick, with something that nobody knew what it was, and he was writing to a friend who had lived in New York, who now lived in New Mexico, saying what was going on with these two people. And that was in March of 1981. The first articles about AIDS appear in May and June. So he didn't know, nobody knew. And of course, I don't think he had read those letters, in 40 years. So that was the shock you're talking about. I mean, I was 21, and at that time, I wish I were 21 when I'd been doing the research, but.
It's a powerful connection. And Thymaya, tell us the title of what you're working on and about a bit about this project.
So my book is a memoir. The title changes a lot, but right now it's AIDS, Raves, and Pirates. And I guess to sort of say, like, my background's in film, and I've written lots of different, TV pilots, and I've worked in documentaries, and I've done all these different things. And throughout that, there's always this element, whether or not it's like, where's your name from? Or people always want to like get into the details of my background, which is very specific. And the intersection with that is my father died of AIDS when I was 13. So I grew up very much under I don't even know what the word would be for it, but like that AIDS has been present since I was born, basically. I mean, I was born in 1978. I think my dad probably got sick, I don't know, early, mid-'80s. And I was conscious of his illness probably by the time I was 7 or 8 years old. So these are all like these sort of pieces of my own story that I'm 46 now, but at the time when I started working on this, it was just people kept asking me questions, and I always was like, oh, and people would say, oh, you should really write a book. And I was like, oh, I really don't want to write about this. It's just like, I've been in therapy. It's fine. Nobody needs to know, And so elements of my background, or elements of the different things that I work through in my life, have ended up in other parts of my work. And I think one of the things that I noticed was that maybe it was time for me to be a bit clearer, to sort of explain myself a little bit more in terms of where I'm coming from, what my perspectives are, and why my perspectives are the way they were. And so then I just began this process of just, digging in and just going through all the stories that, the stories you tell about yourself, and then you realize, wait, is that true? Like, did that actually happen, or did I just imagine that when I was like 8 years old? So I just started doing that. That was part of the project that I was working on here, and it's just taking years. I've written the book 4 times. It's finished. I'm done. I'm like, I'm done. It's great. And then I'm like, no, I got to start over. But yes, so I don't know if that answers the question.
It does answer the question, and there's so much to dive into with both of that. I think in order to fully flesh out the context for all of us here and give us a richer experience, let's start the rest of the talk with you guys reading from your works. Either of you want to volunteer to go first?
We were going to arm wrestle.
Oh, right, yeah.
You go first.
Okay, so I'm reading from a chapter called "The Year the Shit Hit the Fan," which is Larry in London. Larry lived in London from 1961. I mean, I'll say this, but 1961 to 1970, and he was born in the United States, and his most famous work, well, before he became an AIDS activist, was producing and writing the screenplay for the movie Women in Love, which was directed by Ken Russell. And that was where I begin, about the next year of Larry's life, although I don't go into all details of the year, so don't worry. The Year the Shit Hit the Fan, Larry Kramer, London to New York, 1970. And the movie, Women in Love, premiered in London on November 13th, 1969, and earned £6,700 in 4 days, which I was astounded was the equivalent of $145,000 in today's dollars. So it was a big success. Imagine your little boy being responsible for bringing this great classic to the screen, Larry wrote to his mother. It's a long way from Mount Rainier, isn't it? And that's the suburb of Washington where he grew up. Oh, okay. Might be easier because I'm... Does this work? The success of Women in Love was a triumph set apart from Larry's personal anguish in the months before and after its premiere. This is sort of Larry could be at any moment of his life. "No, I'm not particularly happy," he wrote in his journal in 1969. "In fact, I'm unhappy, insecure, very moody, like any psychoanalytically oriented 20th century Jew. I stay alone because I can't imagine anyone else putting up with me, particularly when I can hardly put up with myself." He had come to London at 26 in 1961, following his hunch that in the small American expatriate film world, he could make a name for himself and become a producer more quickly than in America. 2 months after arriving, he wrote to his mother, "My feelings about it all now are that I'll continue this grind for a year or two, during which time I should have won everyone's complete confidence and unwavering devotion, and then spring a script of my own upon them in the hopes that they'll let me make a low-budget film." It had taken Larry more than a year or two that he'd fancifully predicted, but Women in Love was the low-budget film he'd envisioned. Larry in 1961, though, was Larry as he would remain until the end of his life, sure of success, sometimes but more often consumed by worry he would fail, and above all, desperately in need of proof of complete confidence and unwavering devotion from family, friends, colleagues, lovers, as if this could erase the self-doubt that left him facing almost every day with the same question: why was he destined to remain unloved? It was in childhood that Larry's husband learned to defend himself, his husband said. That defending himself with his father is the basis of his anger at the way people treat each other, the basis of the fuck you. For Larry, 1969 would become just what he feared it would be. "This will be known as the year the shit hit the fan," he wrote in a New Year's letter to his brother and sister-in-law, Arthur and Alice. Women in Love would be finished, but even its success wouldn't allay his worst fears. "Every other day I am simply petrified," he wrote. "When bad days come, and they do often, I am fearful I shall put knives through my stomach, afraid of taking baths because my bathroom becomes a mental home, afraid to go out of the house." Women in Love had proved to himself, I'm good and talented and etc., I know. But now, instead of fearing failure, he was, he wrote, scared to death of being successful. He described the terrible times he had on the tops of buildings or anything over 3 stories high, and concluded he was scared to rise too high. This was perhaps too neat a psychoanalytic interpretation, but true or not, insight, as was so often the case with Larry, did not bring sustained relief. His fear of heights lasted the rest of his life, as did his resistance to going any higher than the 3rd floor of any building unless absolutely necessary. The apartment at 2 Fifth Avenue on Washington Square, where Larry lived from 1973 until his death, was on the 3rd floor. That Larry was gay was never an issue he doubted or was ashamed of. Even in college at Yale, he had been relatively blasé about it. His shame as a child had been more about being called a sissy, whether by his father or by other boys. In the dozen years between the time Larry graduated from Yale and Women in Love was released, he struggled to live openly as a gay man and to become a writer. He had gone from the mailroom at William Morris to Oscar nominee. And I have to say, one of my favorite quotes is from a Hollywood executive who I actually did the Zoom interviewing him while I was here, a man named Michael Gruskoff, who later produced Young Frankenstein and other movies. But one of my favorite quotes comes from him. He met Larry at William Morris in the mailroom, and he said that he was always astounded by Larry's intelligence and by his ability to say what he thought, even when he was an underling. He said, Larry didn't have a chip on his shoulder then, only half a chip. After Women in Love, Larry was committed to writing a gay story, an adaptation of Yukio Mishima's novel Forbidden Color, because he saw this as a key component about his own increasing awareness about his homosexuality. 2 weeks after the UK premiere of Women in Love, he wrote to a Columbia Pictures executive in London, I think that what young audiences today respect more than anything else is honesty, and that is why Women in Love, Midnight Cowboy, and Easy Riders are drawing them in. Kids are sick of love scenes shot through gauze because they know that that is not the way it is in real life. They know that Ruby Keeler doesn't dance on 42nd Street, but that Ratso Rizzo limps there instead. The greater difficulty for Larry, he was 35 in 1970, was he had grown up believing that Ruby Keeler would win both stardom and Dick Powell, so she would find fame and love. And he believed in that fantasy even as he neared 85. One of the other great quotes is that Edmund White told me, and he and Larry had many difficulties, but he was very sympathetic when he said, people like Larry and me, who were raised on all of those Hollywood movies, have a very romantic idea of love. So he revised Forbidden Colors, which he set not in Japan, but in London, and bizarrely, I think a bit too autobiographically, retitled it Head Games. He was in analysis every day, and sent it around to studios, but the fact that he could not sell it was a sign to him that his decade in London and in analysis was enough. He wrote, he went to Positano in the summer of 1970 for a vacation. He wrote, perhaps I should never look at myself physically again. The constant repetition of mirror searchings, investigations, bring on a self-consciousness which is becoming too burdensome, too painful. Must I expose my body to these penetrating Italian stares? I feel everyone looks at my legs. Let them think I'm the dancer I was, called for being a sissy. I was called a sissy for being. He felt he must be thin to fully enjoy what he said was, quote, coming out into the world. And I think that's so interesting because by 1970, that wasn't even yet really a phrase people used, but it was the phrase that came to him, coming out as a gay man. But to do that was frightening to him, and the only salvation, he wrote, is food in gigantic amounts. If there's anything that my book does, I hope it brings some sympathy for Larry in his pain, but also a sense of his sense of humor. He wrote, my conflict, is it quite simple? I want foods food, lots, but no, I can't have it because it will disfigure me. I want to be thin, but I'm willing to be fat, which I am depends on which half is in the ascendancy. Trouble focuses on chocolate because it is the single most dangerous commodity in its ability to wreak havoc. My short haircut, all butchered off, reveals that I am going bald. Why not allow myself to get fat as well? Enjoy getting older. Forget the vanity. Am I afraid of age? And is becoming thin a way of becoming young? I want to be devastatingly thin for Arthur and Alice. I want to hear Alice say, "Larry, you look fantastic." So then he goes back to London and he goes into a spiral, and he's in such a bad state that his analyst, Dr. Gillespie, comes to his apartment for the session. And he writes in his diary, "I come back to you in fear, anxiety, the usual shit. Will it ever go away? Or is this what being alive means? If so, why am I such a sissy? My threshold of myself seems very low. Something is pressing in on me, some conflict. Is it as simple as desiring to leave Gillespie?" And then he makes this long list of what he wants to leave behind in London and what he's afraid of, but then sort of magically, and he always had this ability to do it, after he makes this list, he then makes another list of all the things that he has to look forward to and why he should leave London for New York. And he puts in his diary, "now," in capital letters, and he sort of shifts, and then he writes a list that's twice as long as the reasons that he had for being afraid, what he has to look forward to. And he ends his diary by saying that after his session with Dr. Gillespie, he's feeling better. Gillespie encouraged his move, which lifted, this is what Larry says, my homosexual guilt that I feel about returning to America mainly for homosexual reasons. And then the diary that he kept in London ends that day, and this is the last line of it, which I feel is just explains what Larry did for the rest of his life. So this is November 1970. "I am going back to New York to finally settle down and be gay, and it ain't easy to do." That was his motto, I think, for the rest of his life. And he moved to New York 2 weeks later. And I just wanted to end with a quote that is about here. He was visiting East Hampton in 1972, and he was staying with a friend who, part of the letter that he writes is wonderful because he talks about how this friend crept into bed with him and tried to have sex. He uses more vulgar language, and what kind of host is this that does that? But the friend also knew Willem de Kooning, and so he says, he wrote to a friend, "I was very moved to meet de Kooning, who has always been one of my favorites. He lives in an enormous studio with all his beautiful canvases, and he is such a fine and decent man, speaking in this slight Dutch accent, and so interested in us and in the world and in how to look at things. I felt humble in the presence of such creativity. So that was my weekend, exposed to creativity and feeling I should be more so myself. There are things I want to say and do."
Great quote to end on.
Oh, thank you. It's Larry's quote.
We're going to borrow it at the church. I'm going to have it on a T-shirt, like the creativity, to bask in creativity on the East End, according to Larry Kramer.
I think that's fair use. I won't have to tell his executor.
Thank you. Thymaya, can you do some reading for us? Sure, yeah, do the thing.
So this is just a short sample chapter. It's called "Aren't We Lucky?" Uh-oh. It was cold. It wasn't supposed to be this cold in Florida. I had my black leather Michael Jackson Thriller jacket on with all the zippers, and Julie, my 16-year-old foster sister, was layered beneath her denim-on-denim look. We were in the astronauts' friends and family section waiting for the shuttle launch. A few months earlier, my paternal grandmother, Eleanor, had invited me to her school, PS11, where she was an administrator, to meet astronaut Ronald McNair, the second black man ever to go to space. He had come to visit her old elementary school teacher, Miss Taylor, and her third grade class. Miss Taylor was a friend of my grandmother's. This connection later garnered me an invite to the upcoming, just around the corner, launch of the Challenger shuttle. During his visit, Dr. McNair let me put on his bright blue astronaut jacket for a photograph. It was heavy, crisp, and made of a material that felt sci-fi. I recall how it was festooned with badges and American flags, and most importantly, it had the feeling of having been in space. I was 7 years old and very impressed by Dr. McNair. I dreamed that one day I, too, could become an astronaut. My parents were locked in their familiar pattern of conflict, rehashing the same unresolved tensions that had long defined their relationship. From my father's point of view, my mother was letting my mind rot by allowing me to watch TV. And why hadn't I kept up with my Chinese, or why wasn't I going to prep school like he had? Criticisms all from afar, as my father was increasingly in China doing whatever he did. When the opportunity of the launch came up, it was going to be a family trip, since my father's family was the connection. But soon, even that became overly complicated by my father's travel schedule and demands. So in the end, my mother made the executive decision to go without him, which I think he resented. She thought the launch would be a formative memory for me, and then, unbeknownst to my father, who would probably not have approved, I would get to spend a few days afterwards at Disney World. For my father, there was no higher purpose to Disney World, which is the part I was actually excited about. That early morning in late January, we were on the windswept shores of Cape Canaveral, sitting in bleachers across the bay from the launch area. There were family members and a ton of supporters of the school teacher turned astronaut, Krista McAuliffe, many of whom held up hand-painted signs wishing her a safe voyage, not only because she was a rare female in the profession, but also because she was an every woman, emblematic of a bold new American future that involved ordinary people going into space. Sending McAuliffe was a PR coup for NASA at a time when they needed a boost. And now all the schools across the country were, as part of their curriculum, following McAuliffe's journey from educator to superstar space hero. Back home in upstate New York, I knew my entire class would be watching the launch on TV in the auditorium. In the distance, you could see the shuttle standing at attention, upright and pointing to the sky as if in a salute. Steam floated around the base. From my perspective, the rocket looked shiny and fragile like one of my toys. We all had blankets on our laps to keep us warm the way people of late-season football games do. My mother sipped drip coffee and Julie her hot cocoa. It was supposed to be 1, 2, 3 liftoff, but the launch was super delayed. I grew bored, other kids were bored, the TV reporters were bored, America was bored. When were the fireworks going to go off so we could get down to the real business of me going to Disney World? Grumblings of maybe something is wrong with the shuttle spread throughout the crowd. After a few grueling hours, a crackling voice came over a loudspeaker telling us that Mission Control was calling it. The weather wasn't right, they said, so we returned to our Howard Johnson motel a short drive from the launch site. For the next few days, we would wake up early, listen to the radio, and be ready to drive to Cape Canaveral again, hoping today would be the day. But it kept being too cold for a launch. I recall that fateful morning when my mother looked at the freezing temperature and said, "There's no way they're going to launch in this weather. Let's go to Disney World." I was over the moon. Yes, the Challenger was cool, but finally, Disney World. A nice, normal family vacation that didn't involve me finding ways to entertain myself in Asian mountaintop pagodas that were my family's normal kind of travel destination. This would be a trip just for me, one I could brag about with my friends back in Kingston. We drove to the gigantic Disney World parking lot. It was still so cold that my hands felt numb as we queued to get in. Julie rubbed the ends of my fingers to warm them. Julie was always one of my favorite foster sisters. I had a few by that point. She had a raspy voice and a blown-out Joan Jett rocker hairdo. She was of the acid-wash jeans variety of the 1980s teen. She was also tough, and at one point made it onto the Kingston High School football team as a kicker. She never played, though, and quit the team shortly after. I heard later it was because everyone kept calling her that fucking dyke. At the Magic Kingdom, Julie held me as we pushed through the crowded entrance. My mother looked at the map to see which rides we should go on first. I was so excited. It was 11:38 a.m. on January 28th, 1986, when I noticed Goofy looking up into the sky. And then somebody screamed. I heard popping, like Pop Rocks candy crackling in your mouth. Julie let go of my hand and pointed toward a thin, blooming cloud of smoke, like a firework without color, and a speeding trails of debris split out in opposite directions across the blue. What is it? Julie's voice quivered as she looked up to my mother for answers. My mom was quiet and looked at me, and then before she could say anything, someone yelled out, "Oh my God, it's the Challenger." "It's gone," said another. Goofy removed his head, revealing the sweaty, shocked face of the actor inside. Snow White cried. Everything in the Disney park came to a standstill. It was a national disaster. The next thing I knew, we were in the car, listening intently to the news on the radio. I was in the back, holding my hands near the heater. In the distance, the peaks of the Magic Kingdom beckoned, undisturbed by the day's events. "That poor man," Julie kept sobbing and sobbing. I sat quietly, listening to her tears. I thought about the weight of Ronald McNair's hand on my shoulder, the popping of the explosion, the puffiness of that white cloud of smoke streaking up and then down. Inside that thing was someone I had known, and now he was at the bottom of the ocean or in a million pieces. I thought about the kids back at my school who had watched all of this live on TV. Had they seen everything up close, zoomed in, worse than what I saw? Had my father watched from Thailand? Weren't we all supposed to write a report on Ronald McNair and Krista McAuliffe flying up in the Challenger launched next week for school? Would I still give my firsthand account? I kept thinking about Ronald McNair's family and the Krista McAuliffe supporters with their day-glow well-wishing signs, the crying Snow White, and all the gasps in the theme park. I leaned up to the left side of my mother's seat, the area where the seatbelt meets the headrest. "Is he dead?" My mother nodded her head, tears flowing beneath her glasses. I took that in. Then a numb feeling, like my cold fingers, rolled over me. In the distance was happiness, the happiest place on earth. In this car was sadness. I rolled down the window to smell the air outside. I needed to breathe. It had warmed up a little. I could see that people were leaving the park now. Befuddled newscasters and scientists on the radio tried to explain how this state-of-the-art shuttle could unexpectedly explode. They were all using the word tragedy. Clearly, this was not a fun day. But by my logic, if everyone was heading for the Disney World exit, then the lines wouldn't be as bad for the rides. I kicked the seat. My mother looked at me in the rearview mirror as she reached back and held my legs as if to console me. I knew that I should have felt sad or been crying too. I mean, I was the actual connection to Dr. McNair. He had invited me and my dad, not them. But I didn't really know the man, and the moment of his death, which I had just witnessed, felt so make-believe. He was in the sky, in pieces, and my young brain couldn't put it together. It was too abstract. I knew what death was. I had already experienced it with my great-aunt Mary, but I had felt numb then too, unable to cry. Meanwhile, I was a kid in the back of a car, hungry, cold, bored, and outside Disney World, aching to get in. I couldn't take it any longer. "Mom?" "Yes, Thymaya, you okay?" "Yeah, can we go on the rides now?" My mother looked at me, her eyes registering a mixture of confusion, pity, rage, and understanding. She mumbled something to Julie. The idea had never crossed my mother's mind to return to Disney World on such a day, she told me later. But she had an 8-year-old acting weird and traumatized teenager falling apart in front of her, and what were they going to do, sit in the car and cry all day? She let out a long exhale. "Yeah, I mean, I guess it's okay, we're here." Disney World was emptier now. There were no lines. Julie and I went on Space Mountain, which terrified me, and she laughed a little. We also zoomed through Disney's legendary It's a Small World ride, where we rode on little boats past a series of vignettes with dolls representing cultures around the world as they sang the famous chorus, "It's a small world after all," which made my mother cry again, while I counted on all the countries I'd already been to with my father. I have pictures of that day. I smiled and laughed as if it were the best moment of my life. I hugged Goofy and I danced with Minnie Mouse. The show had to go on. You would never know that just above us, tiny bits of heroes circulated like snowflakes. Did I breathe them into my lungs, I wondered? Were they now a part of me? My last memory of that time is of sitting alone on the Dumbo ride. the cool air chilling my cheeks, waving blissfully to my mother below. I loved Dumbo. He was a sad little elephant who always made me feel things. From my perch, I could see Julie enjoying a giant funnel cake. I was at the happiest place on earth, Challenger explosion or not. When the Dumbo ride descended to earth, I went right around to the entrance because nobody was there, and I rode it again. I may have gone 3 times. I often saw Ronald McNair in my dreams, but he didn't haunt me. He was a good spirit, smiling and letting me wear his cool blue space jacket. Sometimes I dreamt about his strong fatherly hand severed and floating at the bottom of the sea. For some reason, I imagine a wedding ring on his finger shimmering in the reflection of a submarine searchlight. I conjure what he must have been feeling that morning, excited, scared, on the precipice of experience, the sudden surprise, and then nothing, like a mid-sentence interruption. Maybe he didn't have time to think about it. It just happened. I have a handwritten letter that Ronald McNair wrote to my grandmother's friend's class. I found it in her apartment after she died. In some ways, I feel it was also written for me. It reads, "To the students of Miss Taylor's class, thank you for your very beautiful, well-done display and for all your nice letters. I enjoyed everything very much. It's nice to know that good kids like yourself are interested in what I'm doing and will be following my mission. Sorry I couldn't write sooner, but I enjoy the thought of your kindness all along. Say hello to my teacher and yours, Miss Taylor. I guess you know by now what a great person she is. Aren't we lucky? Ronald McNair."
Thank you both for each of those readings. They're both very startling and quite visual in very different ways, but also in one of the things that is quite stirring and striking is in both pieces, it's necessary to construct a narrative. And so I'm taking a step backwards and envisioning or placing you both as writers as opposed to narrators, right? But to think of the process of putting these words together and the series of choices one takes or makes when, erecting a creative work. Fundamentally, there is narrative structure and linearity, as well as in the case of nonfiction, what you do with the facts, which facts you keep, which facts you dispose of. And when you piece those 2 things together, you're reconstituting reality along some kind of linear narrative that presumably you have control over. So I guess the question here for both of you is, and I'm going to start with Thymaya on this, what was that experience of control over the narrative? Because this is your life story, basically, where in the case of this particular reconstructing the experience of this jarring contrast of 80s exuberant America, right? Personified by NASA and Disney. And you're at this moment of really actual and symbolic catastrophe. But you're piecing together this narrative. What was it like for you to go back and reconstitute that? What did you discover about yourself in the process and that process of controlling the narrative?
Yeah, we talked about this earlier. This was actually really like emotional. There was periods of time, between us, I would like cry a lot. Like I actually almost started, there's one line where I start to, I get a crick in my throat every time.
What's the line?
It's when Goofy takes his head off. It's just like,
Was that an actual memory or an embellishment?
Oh no, so this is where it gets interesting. So this is a story that I've told my whole life. Like I've always told this story. They're like, I saw the Challenger blow up and Goofy took his head off. And people are like, what? It's like every dinner party, it's like, this and the pirates, it's the things I talk about. And then when I actually sat down to write it, it was like this moment where I was like, wait, what year was that? And then I had to do it. And then what's really interesting is this is just at the edge of pre-digital. So it was one of those moments that were like super well documented, but you really have to go deep, like to get into the video surveillance. I mean, the video footage and stuff like that. So for example, there was a part of me that was like, wait, did I really see this? Or am I just putting pieces together of a memory or some, I was 8, so how much of this is what I was told, how much of this is true? And then what was fascinating was when one of the main points was like, how did I see it in Orlando? Like, I just was like, how did that that seems so far away. How did I see that? And then I actually found a YouTube video of a home video of the Challenger explosion from Orlando, and it totally aligned with my memory. And I was like, okay, it's true, And so it was a really fascinating thing of just, you have your memory, you have your childhood memory, and then fact checking it and being like, wait, am I just making this up? Like, and then being like, no, I'm not. Actually, it did happen. And, and I remember seeing, I'm pretty sure it was Goofy, and they took their head off. And it's a big no-no at Disney World. But I mean, I just remember very clearly there was just this like electric kind of trauma that hit, and everyone just stopped, and people were just crying, and I was like, whoa. And anyway, so that a lot of that was trying to like rebuild it. And then I had photographs, and I was like, okay, I was wearing my Michael Jackson jacket, so I could tell through the photographs that my memory aligned with it. But some things that were not aligned was, I remember it all in one day, but I forgot that it was actually over several days. So just stuff like that was really weird as a process, because you want to tell a good story, but then because it's based in reality, you don't want to like make shit up. You know what I mean? So it's that tension is always there. Like, how much do you want to jazz it up just to like go for the beat, which is what I would normally do in my narrative work, is just like, it doesn't matter, just tell a great story. And this is like, wait, am I lying? And it's like, no, this actually happened. So
yeah, please respond to that, Bill.
Well, I think, the challenge, no pun intended, sorry, for me is constructing a narrative from the beginning of Larry's life, or even telling the story of the family history. It's standard in a biography. Presumably, I will start with some scene, later in life, but so a lot of the asides that I had here about, well, this is what he was like, or he was always very needy, that kind of thing. When I wrote this chapter, part of it, I wrote it during COVID, which I did as an exercise based, just to write something based on the research that I had done before COVID. And I realized after a while that would only take me so far, because I was having to do in what should be a chronological narrative. When I sent it to my editor, and even a couple of chapters that I sent as recently as last year, where I was saying too much about what had happened before and what happened afterwards. And I guess that is a problem in my writing from always, because I remembered that when I was writing my PhD dissertation, my advisor said, chronology, just like stick to the chronology. So about a year ago, I started going back and writing from the very beginning, Larry's family history, his grandparents, all of that stuff. And a lot of it will need to be trimmed and edited, but what I've been trying to show, is that there is something in Larry, that there was just an irrevocable loneliness that obviously began in childhood, and a lot of it had to do with his parents' marriage, and a lot of it had to do with his father's anger about his own life, about Larry being a sissy, about Larry's older brother who was 8 years older, so much more of the kind of son that George, Larry's father, wanted. And it as much analysis as he had, and as much love as Larry later had, he never got over that insecurity. And one of the things that, I think this is standard. When you read a biography, obviously you're going to read about someone's childhood. But there were a couple of things in conversation with Larry that made me realize he got over it less than some other people, especially people who are as accomplished as he was.
Wait, when you say he got over his childhood less than other people? Like he held on to childhood pain?
Yes. I mean, and, like one woman I interviewed, I mean, who knew Larry from high school, when I was talking about that moroseness that overcame him that led me to ask who was writing his biography, she said, that Larry could become morose. And she said, with Larry, childhood came right back. And she knew him, I mean, from high school on. But I was talking to Larry about some quotes from his mother that a person who had tried to write a biography of Larry in the 90s interviewed his mother, who was still alive. And I was able to get this man's notes from his widow, and in the interview that he had done with Rhea, I mean, who was at that time like 95 or something, and she was living in a retirement community in Bridgeport, and she was totally with it, but it turned out not the best storyteller, really. And as I was reading the notes to Larry, he would say, she always said that, or, whatever. He would have interjections. And at one point, she said how George, her husband, Larry's father, was a really great bridge player, and she had learned how to play bridge so that it would give them, Rhea and George, something to do together. And Larry just perked right up, and he said, that's true. And he said how he and his brother could never figure out why his parents had married one another. They had nothing in common. They always argued. They never seemed to have sex. I mean, there was nothing that brought them together except this bridge. And then he went in, sort of segued, and he said something like, we never did anything together as a family. We never even went to the zoo together. And I thought, what an interesting thing. I mean, I don't think Larry had any interest in going to the zoo particularly, but it was just the idea that there were somehow other normal families, whatever that meant, and that they were not one of them. And then at another point, we were talking about his early career in the movies, and he, as a child, had gone to the movies a lot, and his father, he said, didn't approve, and his father got angry at him for going to the movies too often. And then he sort of was silent, and I thought, oh, well, that subject's done. And then he said what seemed like a non sequitur, but then I realized it wasn't, that he said it just wasn't fair. And it wasn't fair in 1981 what they were doing about AIDS, that they just weren't paying attention to us. And I realized that his loneliness in childhood was this outraged sense of justice or injustice, and that the segue from how his father had treated him about going to the movies, and then about what happened in 1981, that really was a childhood trauma, anger. I'm not even sure it was a trauma, but that anger, it's what his husband said, the basis of the fuck you. But they were really connected. What seemed to him injustice when he was a child was basically what propelled him as an activist. It just wasn't fair that they weren't paying attention to us. And that is really connected to this larger idea he had in this novel that he wrote, I mean, which he spent 30 or more years writing and was published in 2 volumes in 2015 and 2020, just the last volume just before he died, called The American People. Because he said and he had various ideas, not only gay people, but we are not included among their American people. And so that sense of his father being angry at him for going to the movies was, I mean, really what he lived his life by for the next 80 years, that sense. So in trying to construct a narrative where that is less onerous than maybe even what I've said here, but so that everything that you need to say later, which I haven't said yet, because parts of it, a lot of it still remains to be written, is clear, and you're not then having to say when Larry is 55, well, this had happened to him in childhood. I want that to be a clear narrative.
All the way through.
And, of course, you might have to remind people, well, this had happened. But unless you establish this, and it's hard to do, and I think it's not only in the writing, but even more so in the editing, which not only must I do myself, but luckily I have a very good editor. You want that people to feel that not only is this the childhood of Larry Kramer, but Larry Kramer is who he is because of this childhood.
Mm-hmm. I get that. How do you contend with that when you're writing about yourself? It's a great point that Bill just made. How do you deal with that, Thymaya? Are you going back confessionally into your childhood and planting seeds of who you were as a child to inform your experience as an adult?
I try not to too much, because I think it can. I don't know. I was thinking what you were saying. It can get a little prescriptive. Like all of a sudden you're like, oh, I am the way I am because my dad did something in 1986, and you're like, oh, am I? Like it's just like, or am I just my own person, and like whatever, shit happens, And so I mean, and I think there's a real. I actually had like I had to like sort of separate from how I was doing the book and who I was working with on the book, because there was definitely like a push to go put it in this sort of like Oprah book club kind of structure, which is like something happened here and that's why this is here, and you were working with pirates because you had daddy issues, and I'm like, yeah, like maybe, like, or maybe I just think pirates are cool, So I think that there's like elements. I like your idea of like you just sort of plant the seeds of it and you don't have to be didactic about it, So it's like you can plant the seeds of like, why do I say AIDS, raves, and pirates? Is like, well, obviously there's this kind of need to be in that sort of in-between space where you're close to the frisson, you know what I mean? Like, and that is probably like the through line, and the book is an exploration of maybe how I got there, but it's not necessarily answering the questions, if that makes sense. And I was just thinking what you were saying, I was working with this like writing coach because this book is just killing me. And she said the nicest thing once. She was like, about it being true or not true with memoir. She's like, what is it, like, it's true if it's emotionally true, right? So if the child emotionally felt there was a monster in the closet, then write it that there's a monster in the closet. Like, it's not a Wall Street Journal. Like, you're not going to get fact checked. Like, if your memory was you had a monster in a closet, you're telling it from the point of view of the 8-year-old who thought there was a monster in the closet. And that kind of like frees me up a little bit, because one of the fascinating things about my book, and this is where it turns into therapy, was my dad was a bit of a fabulist. Like, you never really knew was he a CIA agent or was he making it up? Like, it was always like, there was always a lot going on, and it always was like kind of true. And so a lot of the book is actually dealing with an unreliable parent and like an unreliable narrative about yourself, and all the things about yourself that, are you gay? Are you, my father's black, I'm very light skinned, like, all of these different things that it's not always like an easy explanation. And I feel like that truthness, or whatever you want to call it, is the space that I'm really excited by. Like, is it true? Does it matter? I don't know.
Did you mentioned that your father died of AIDS. When he died, were these questions resolved for you? Like, did you actually know why?
No, we didn't talk about it. We did not talk about it. When he died, it was 1992, and it was, at least the way my family experienced it, and there was no like shame. It was just like, he died after a short illness, and there was.
Forgot to know from him like his story.
Yeah, no, he's a weird dude. I mean, like, I mean, I knew he had a very complicated, tragic, kind of glamorous story. You know, he came from a very interesting. There was a lot going on there. I didn't learn that from him. I learned a lot of it from after he died, going through his stuff. Also, just sort of being the inheritor of his everything. He died at 39. I mean, so you know, it's hard to even fathom. Like, I'm much older than he is, or he was. You know, and you know, and I think it's funny because if he had lived another year or so, I think with AZT and stuff,
He could have lived like
he was just the last, like kind of one of the last, like he just
Yeah, it's true.
It was like the AIDS ward, you know what I mean? Like I went into like the AIDS
Yeah,
ward.
no, it's true. Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that there's I lost my train of thought. See, it just turns into a therapist.
Bill, were you going to say something before I open up to questions? Yeah.
I mean, the thing about feeling and what you might remember and what isn't true. I mean, Larry was interviewed many times over the years. I mean, over the decades, and so certain things. And I think this is true not only because by the time I was interviewing him for the book, but people in their 80s. I mean, he was fully compos mentis. You know, things have become set narratives because they've been asked the question so many times. So it was not really useful. I mean, we did talk about the beginning of Act Up or things like that, but what I found is once I started doing research, he and I would read him a letter or something. He would always add interesting details. And one, for example, so when he was making Women in Love, he always told the story. He had said it in many interviews when the screenplay of Women in Love was published in a volume in the early 2000s of his dramatic writings. He told the story again of how he had wanted Glenda Jackson, who played the lead in one of the Women in Love for the role, and Ken Russell didn't want her because she had bad teeth and varicose veins, and she agreed to have her teeth fixed and to have her varicose veins dealt with. So he always told that story. And then I found a letter in his papers, because he was the producer of the movie also, as I said, a letter from him or his assistant, I forget now, to Glenda Jackson's agent or manager saying, well, this is the doctor. It was a doctor in Harley Street in London to see about varicose veins. He took care of Elizabeth Taylor and Sophia Loren's varicose veins. So there's the letter. I mean, it's a better, more detail than Larry obviously remembered. But not only was it true, but the actual letter is more colorful. And then a week later, or a few weeks later, they're going on location for the movie, and there's another letter to the costume designer, who was Ken Russell's wife, saying, well, the doctor thinks Glenda will be fine with walking around, but just in case, we should order 20 pairs of support hose in these colors, which will work well for the filming. So there was always more detail, but what I was going to say is, I once was hearing the novelist Louis Begley, who wrote his first novel, an autobiographical first novel called Wartime Lies, which was about his childhood in Poland before the war and then the beginning of the Second World War. And he was giving a talk, and someone said, so he published that book when he was 57. This was about 2 years ago. Someone said, well, Louis, how true is this? Or how much of this is true? Not, is it true? And he said, I don't really remember anymore, because, he'd written the novel so long ago, and that was his version of the truth. So it seemed to me a revelation when he said that about how to take Larry's stories. But he said, what I remember is that the thing that is the closest to the truth is what I wrote about my grandfather. Because when I was working on the book, I remember that I wanted to make as true a portrait of him as I could, because I loved him so much. And there were things in the novel that are completely invented. There's a woman, I'm not sure if it's his sister or a nanny or something, that he knew was completely invented, but that he didn't remember and yet had wanted certain things to be true. And then just the last thing I'll say, there are two little things that I think are crucial in Larry's life, even though they're just moments, that it's necessary to sort fact from fiction. And I've struggled with these things. One is that if you've seen The Normal Heart, the main character is based on Larry, and then he falls in love with this character named Felix. And Larry always said, he stopped saying it after a while, but when the play premiered, that all of this was about a man he loved who died of AIDS. But it's clear from the slightest bit of looking at Larry's journals, date books, letters, that there was he wasn't involved in a relationship. So one person who, David France, who's a documentary filmmaker who made the movie How to Survive a Plague, the first question he asked me when I got together with him, have you found out who the real Felix was? Because, there's been debate, why did Larry say this so often? When it clearly isn't true. But then the other thing is, I don't know if people know the AIDS activist and writer who died in 1990, Vito Russo. He wrote a book called The Celluloid Closet. And Larry spoke at his memorial in December of 1990. And in all of the written versions of Larry's eulogy, he begins with the line, in the written version, "We killed Vito." Meaning that we didn't do enough. There are people who swear that he actually said, "You killed Vito," meaning the people in the audience. And a lot of people have been angry about that for 35 years, especially since Vito's family was there. And even though it's 1990 and into the ACT UP era, it's surprising that there was only one video recorded of it, and it's at the New York Public Library without sound. So I don't know what he really said, and I find this, bothers me. But I did ask Charlie Russo, Vito's brother, when I interviewed him. He said he didn't remember. He didn't think Larry said, "You killed Vito." And Vito's mother was always in touch with Larry afterwards, so if any of them were offended, the family wasn't. But Charlie Russo said that whatever Larry said, it was right, because we hadn't done enough. And sitting there as his family member, he realized that we loved Vito, we supported Vito, but we never did anything to protest, to do anything about AIDS. We loved him and we supported him, but we took no action. And so I wish I could find a video that said what Larry actually said. I even tried to watch the New York Public Library video to see if I could read his lips about that second. But
amazing.
So sorting fact from fiction.
Yeah, fact from fiction is the challenge here, even when we're both dealing with what's essentially the truth. That's a whole nother issue. But I think on that note, I'll open it up to your questions and thoughts. We have Camille here.
Okay, this may be protracted. I'll try to do it quickly. First off, that was one of the most beautiful passages I've ever heard of, someone trying to ambulate what existence is at 8 years old. That was so truly beautiful. I wanted to weep. So you rewrote this, you've written this 4 times, and so I saw Stolen Seas, I even saw Across My Land, and I tried to see live but I couldn't find it streaming anywhere. But so you've dealt a lot with social.
Thank you.
No, it's riveting.
Are you guys meeting for the first time, or is Camille a plant?
I wasn't here.
This is your number 1 fan right here.
I have to find live cargo.
It's a weird one. It's a weird one.
And Walter White. God, that's incredible that you're writing about Walter White. I remember, and he's so lost and not known. So I really look forward to that. I'm getting emotional. All right. But so you're dealing with studios, screenwriters, directors. You're the screenwriter on projects that are about social injustice, but also, you have a certain amount of control and not. And now you're writing memoir and you're writing, creatively, and you've rewritten this a bunch of times. Like, how do you, and speaking with truth and control, and how do you feel more in control? How do you deal with all the emotion that's welling up? But when you're thinking your memories and it's being written on the page, like, do you use photographs or whatever it is, like, then what do you do with the emotion as you're writing? I guess
that's a cool question. Well, first of all, thank you for. That's really nice. I'm emotional. I was just thinking when you were talking about. I have this really weird thing that happens where, I'm a little dyslexic, so it's probably why. But the words on the page, the more I work on it, the more the words on the page start floating around and don't make any sense at a certain point. And so I start to just try to corral them, if that makes sense. Like, I'm trying to, just get it all together, buddy. Like, just bring it in. Like, I don't know. Somehow this is going to make sense, And so I think in terms of, why I keep rewriting it is, I'll go down a certain path and I'm like, okay, this works, but I'm just like, this book should just be called Daddy Issues. And I'm just like, no, I'm like, come on, we don't need another Daddy Issues book. And so then I'm just like, well, what is it really about? Like, what is it, trying to get to that point where I really appreciate that, a point where it's you can kind of have an emotional truth, but it isn't necessarily perfect, And so I'm just rewriting it, trying to get to a point where, yeah, I feel like this chapter is closest to it, but then the rest of the book, there's different styles and things going on, and I need to kind of bring it more to where the whole thing kind of operates on the same frequency, and it's just not there, and I'm lazy, and but yeah, I think there's a certain point, just when you were talking about, there's a certain point where you just, whether you're editing something or you're looking at something, it starts getting deformed in this kind of interesting way, and it doesn't make any sense, and that's probably why you bring an editor in or someone. But I kind of like that moment, because it starts to be I have no idea what this is about. I thought it was about this, and really, for example, halfway into my movie about pirates, I made a movie about pirates, which is what we're talking about Somali pirates. It's not about Somali pirates. It's about this guy, and he's a liar, and he's taking me down this whole path to sort of, he's telling me he's a pirate negotiator, and he's not. And meanwhile, I'm also realizing this guy kind of reminds me of my dad. I'm having all these kind of things with it, and I didn't realize that really until I started working on this, and my agent at the time was because the pirates weren't in this at all, and my agent was like, "Why? Where's the pirates? The pirates is what's going to sell, buddy." And I was kind of like, "Oh, I should put the pirates in here, but why would the pirates be related?" Then I was like, "Because the guy in my pirate movie is a fabulous person who is unreliable and unavailable and dynamic."
That's so interesting. Wow. Yeah. Were you going to say something, Bill? Yeah, that's really fascinating to me. Also, it just occurred to me while you were talking, and from Camille's question, that you do have the benefit of writing a memoir such as this in the age where we are now, which is sort of a post-truth society. Because there were a time memoir writing. Remember James Fry, who got totally
nightmare.
annihilated
That's
for
my nightmare.
Right? That it's sort of people questioning the veracity of his memoir, regardless of why certain details might have been changed.
Or J.K. Rowling.
Okay, well, there's a...
Yeah, but there's also a fascinating, because I know anyways. But yeah, it's a fascinating thing. It was it's a great story, and why did it necessarily, do you know the whole J.K. Rowling?
Well, no, I was going to say about memoir. I've not written a memoir, but I've read a lot of memoirs, and I think one of the reasons that what happened with James Fry was because one of the, I don't know if it's the purposes of reading a memoir, but the feeling that you have in a memoir is that with all the horrible things that might have happened to this person, that they have triumphed over it because here is the book. I mean,
Right.
whatever trauma, whatever horrible things, and either that gives you hope or an idea, oh, well, I'm so glad this terrible thing hasn't happened to me. Remember Augustine Burroughs, who wrote the book Running with Scissors,
Yeah.
said that he thought that people loved reading his book because, oh, my childhood was so much more normal than I thought. So I think the betrayal, I mean, not that every detail in a memoir, I mean, people obviously know about their own lives, but when you have wholesale things that are fictionalized or incidents fictionalized, then the betrayal is that I thought in reading this that I was sharing in your triumph over these circumstances, and even if I'm not reading it as a how-to book, then I too could move beyond what has happened to me in the
Right.
past. And you might empathize with a fiction writer and it might understanding that it's autobiographical fiction, but I do think when wholesale events are created and are put into a memoir, that's different from the shadings of memory, which
That's
people are
true.
willing
Yeah,
to
I mean,
accept.
That's true.
he just straight up lied. I mean, there's like, I think that the problem with the James Fry thing is that he was, the whole sort of crux of the thing was that he was getting over this, in the way in which he
Addiction.
was getting over it, and so that was like why he was on the Oprah Club, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so if that in itself was bullshit, then like the whole thing is bullshit. Where you can have a shade of memory. I mean, my big reference is Nabokov's Speak Memory, and it's just memories and just thinking about the curtains in his mother's, room, and and I think that's just all subjective and lovely, and maybe it doesn't make sense, but straight up going for the jugular, being like, I was on the Challenger. It's like, no, I wasn't. Like, I'm still here. You know what I mean? Like, I'm alive. That's a fact. It's like.
That would be a great
And
story.
then
It's a good
also
story.
just
Yeah.
with Larry and the Normal Heart, no one expects a play to be a complete representation of truth unless it's taken from historical transcripts, but to then say so many times that every word of this is true, or basically. I mean,
Right.
so a lot of people, and maybe this is a good thing because it certainly got this story out in front of a lot of people, leaving aside the love story. I mean, a lot of people think, and Larry acted, perhaps it was like Louis Begley, I mean, that by later on, he didn't even remember what had really happened and what had not, but people take that as a literal history of
Right.
the early days of gay men's health crisis. And for example, there's a lot made by the Larry character of the president of GMHC, a man in real life named Paul Popham, who's in the play, Bruce Niles, and that they have an argument about whether Bruce is upset because the first mailing goes out, it actually says Gay Men's Health Crisis as the return address, and he doesn't like that, and then Larry or Ned is yelling at him like, well, how can you be president of this organization? You're not even willing to have the name Gay Men's Health Crisis on the envelopes. We need someone who can be out. And actually, in Larry's own papers, there are letters from, Joe Smith or Susan Jones, I mean, whatever, I mean, complaining to GMHC that the envelope said that. Like, I don't, because it was an oversized envelope or whatever, I don't want my mailman knowing this. I'm not ashamed of being gay. And so it actually was not just the president who may or may not have said that, but that was a real concern for
Right.
people. And Larry, partly because he had more money and, partly because of what I said about once he moved back to New York, I'm going to lead an open gay life and it ain't easy to do. He had no sympathy when he probably should have for the compromises that other people had to make while still being out.
Right, for sure. So still a challenge. Other questions from the audience? No other questions?
We talked you into submission, or I did.
Well, yes, Salim.
It's not a question, but I need some advice. So if you were doing a biography on a hidden figure,
A biography on what?
what I'm calling a hidden figure?
Hidden figure?
Hidden figure.
Okay.
Yes, okay. And they don't really have journals or diaries, and their memory is somewhat not reliable. How would you approach that as, do you just try and turn it into historical fiction, or do you attempt making up things as you go along in the biography's journey?
Well, one, the attraction for me of that subject is it could be a short book, which I wish I were doing. But no, in all seriousness, I mean, I don't know who this figure is or how hidden they are, but one of the interesting things in doing biographical research, I mean, it's true about Larry, it's true about the figures in my earlier book, I mean, Virginia Woolf, T.S. Eliot, E.M. Forster, and D.H. Lawrence, is that a lot of the most interesting things that are recorded about them are in other people's diaries and letters. And so, yes, I mean, it's a structure of the life that Virginia Woolf kept her diary, but it's also very interesting to know what some, Adeline Morrill said to someone else about Virginia Woolf when she came to visit. So if there are other, people who are less hidden, or maybe they're hidden from us, but they did keep those journals, it could be that that person's life and their actions and even their telling of lies is recorded in other ways. The other thing is, and there's an emerging, I mean, I don't want to say emerging like it's only been in the last few years, but over the last couple of decades and in the last 10 years, I'd say, has gotten much more in the mainstream prize-winning historical biography and narrative history, is what is writing history, particularly about people of color and other marginalized communities, that comes not from the archives, because the archives are given as hiding a lot of what other material exists to tell history. And there's this wonderful book by Taya Miles called All That She Carried, which is history. It won the National Book Award, about this small piece of cloth. I think the woman's name was Ashley, and she was an enslaved worker, and then this piece of cloth is passed down through generations of her family. It's called Ashley's sack, is this piece of material. And so how to write history through the omissions in archives is something that people are doing much more of, and finding alternative ways, including imaginative recreation, which isn't necessarily fictionalized, but is learning as much contextual information and theoretical contextual information. And really that's how, for example, like biographies of William Shakespeare have been written for centuries, because there are so few known documented facts about him. So it will often be about like what Shakespeare must have been like, because this is what the education of men was like in the 16th century. And so I think there are a lot of people who are working in that field in an imaginative way that isn't fictional.
Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, Kelly.
Sorry, I kind of, I guess, have more of a observation, and I am curious to hear both your thoughts on it. And I'm kind of fascinated that Thymaya, I can call you a protagonist, that Kramer was a filmmaker, Thymaya, you're a filmmaker. We grew up in this span of time where there was a growing mediation in the way that we experienced everything. And now certainly young people are dealing with that. And so increasingly over time, this kind of distance from reality happens to us, and Kramer sort of crafting stories and narratives, which then become, I guess, somewhat autobiographical over the course of his life, but finding himself in this direct action and activism, and that really being his like ultimate creative act. And I guess I'm just kind of thinking about the split between mediation and feeling, or what you're calling like AIDS, raves, and pirates, this need to get into something, to me being less about the friction and more about actually wanting to experience something, and the distance you felt between the explosion and Disney World and your child's mind, this kind of idea of trauma sort of being wrapped up in these mediated shared experience, like Challenger, 9/11, whatever, I could go on. But that seems to be a kind of generational issue, and with Kramer, this kind of coming into oneself through, again, like a shared catastrophe, and being able to set aside making things up and finding a path through actually, directly involving oneself in human relations. Anyway, it's kind of just seeing this kind of parallel and wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
Well, one thing I will be brief, is that Larry, one of the fictions I think that he told, which again was not a lie, but a set narrative, was that he had never been political before AIDS, before 1981. And whatever else you can say about Larry, the famous New York Times article, Rare Cancer Seen in 41 Homosexuals, it's so odd that people peg awareness of the AIDS epidemic, or what became called AIDS later, to that article, given that the New York Times rarely covered AIDS for the next few years. But anyway, that appeared on Friday, July 3rd, and Larry was immediately, roused, curious about this, and he held an informational meeting with a doctor who he knew, an NYU doctor, at his apartment on August 11th. So within 5 weeks, Larry had organized this informational meeting with a doctor, and about anywhere from 50 to 100, accounts vary of how many friends and gay men were invited to his apartment to hear that. So Larry immediately sprung into action, and I think that was the first informational meeting about AIDS anywhere in the world. Even a medical, conference. But if you look back at Larry's papers, he was not involved in organizations, and he always told the story, we used to laugh at people at the gay pride parade. We'd sit on Fire Island and watch on TV, which already seems a little fabricated, because I'm not sure that on a Sunday morning or afternoon people were watching TV on Fire Island. But anyway, but when you look at his papers, not only do I think that statement that I read from his diary in 1970 is a political statement about how he was going to live his life when he got back to New York, but in 1975, 1976, leaving aside, he wrote a novel called Faggots, which is published in 1978, which is its own political statement in many ways. But in 1974, 1975, 1976, he's writing lots of letters to the editor of the New York Times, the New Yorker, complaining about their coverage of gay life, that it's absent. And there's a gay rights bill in 1975, for many years, does not get out of committee or is voted down by the city council. And so the first letter, I think, that Larry writes to the New York Times is to the man who was the metropolitan editor at the time, a man named Abe Rosenthal, who then goes on to have a checkered, a successful, but often embarrassing, politically embarrassing career at the Times, especially about gay people, saying, you should really be, it's a surprise to me, but it isn't, that you didn't even cover that this did not get out of committee, because you have to pay attention that gay people are an important minority in this city, where a large number of your subscribers and things like this. And he writes similar letters to lots of editors. There's William Shawn, who was the editor of The New Yorker, about that time, he writes a letter because there's a talk of the town piece about a disco and what it's like. And Larry writes a letter complaining that nowhere in this talk of the town piece did you say, or because the pieces were anonymous then, that it's a gay disco, that it's largely a black disco, and that most of the people who were likely there were likely high on drugs. So you're, telling this in the talk of the town, but you're leaving this out. And then he goes on to complain about coverage of gay issues in the New Yorker, including like, well, if you'd only asked W.H. Auden when he was alive to review books of, interest, like to him as a gay man. And typically for Larry, he sends the letter. The assistant to William Shawn writes back and says, oh, I've passed your letter on to the editor of the Talk of the Town. And Larry writes another letter saying, I wrote a letter to Mr. Shawn. If I wanted to write a letter to the editor of Talk of the Town, I would have, and I can't believe he's not replying himself. So I think those are not organizational. So I read these to Larry, and I said, well, you always say that, before AIDS, you never were political. And he said, well, I don't know about political, maybe just opinionated. But I think it really was political action as he imagined it was necessary to take in the mid-'70s. And so that's a fabrication of his own life. It makes a more dramatic story that he woke up one day, read this article in the New York Times, and then became a political activist. But that's not, he was politically aware for decades.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. That was your phone.
Well, that must be a signal. At least it didn't ring.
Thymaya, did you want to respond to Kelly's question?
Oh, very good question, Kelly. The first thing I was thinking when you said that was, if I had an alternative title to the book, it would be called Participating. And I think maybe particularly for our generation, there's been this tension between history, things happening in history, and then how we interact with it. And that there is this thing, history is happening, and then you're like, oh wait, I'm in history, whether it's 9/11 or whatever. Oh wait, I'm actually in the middle of it. Oh wait, I'm actually changing history. And there's a real hesitation to get too close, because if you get close, you're gonna get hurt, right? If you get too close to what's actually going on, it's just so intense that you kind of pull back. And I think that there's, throughout my book and childhood, there's just stuff where I'm like, why do I know? We had one of my father was really involved with the people in Tiananmen Square, and there's just these things, and it's all tangential. It's not necessarily that I'm actually an actor in history. I'm just a sort of strange tourist moving through, trying not to get burned. But at the same time, it's all these things are happening to me in full time really quickly. And so I think that there's a nice observation there of that tension and that real hesitation to participate fully. But of course, one should participate fully, because that's what life's about. So anyway.
Well, on that note, thank you so much. And thank you to Bill Goldstein and Thymaya. Both of their works will be in the distant future, so please be on the lookout for the release dates in the distant future. Bye for now.